What if a single act of kindness on a rainy city sidewalk could ripple across lives in ways no one saw coming? What if one ordinary man just trying to get home with his daughter suddenly found himself standing between life and something far greater? Before we begin this unforgettable story of courage, second chances, and quiet love, if you enjoy heartfelt, meaningful stories that stay with you long after they end, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. It's a small click for you, but a big encouragement for us to keep creating stories that matter. Now, let's begin. Single dad helped an injured tourist with CPR. The next day, he found himself on a private jet. The rain came in sideways, needling through Jack Monroe's hoodie like it was paper. Seattle was unforgiving in March, cold, wet, and gray as the steel beams he spent his days working under. With his daughter Ellie nestled on his shoulder, her breath warm against his neck, he trudged across the slick pavement of Pioneer Square. She was asleep, her arms limp, soaked strands of hair stuck to her cheek. Jack held her tighter and ducked under the glow of a half-lit donut shop sign. He fished out the last $5 bill from his wallet. One maple bar, he told the vendor, forcing a smile. And if you've got a napkin, we'd appreciate it. The vendor gave him a look, half pity, half curiosity, but handed over the donut and a handful of napkins without a word. Jack thanked him and turned toward the bench under the awning, hoping to let Ellie rest a few more minutes before walking home. That was when he heard the scream. It cut through the rain like glass, sharp, panicked female. He spun around. A crowd was gathering near the old bronze statue at the center of the square. People leaned in, gasped, pulled out phones. Jack's instincts kicked in. He knelt and whispered to Ellie, still half asleep in his arms. "Stay here, baby. Sit on the bench and don't move. Daddy's just checking something." The bench was barely dry under the awning, but she nodded and curled up with the donut in her lap, too tired to argue. Jack jogged across the square water, sloshing in his boots. As he pushed through the wall of bystanders, the scene came into focus. A young woman, late 20s or early 30s, lay on the ground, her eyes wide open and unblinking. Her lips were blue. "Does anyone know CPR?" someone shouted. "I think she's having a seizure." No pulse," a man yelled, fumbling with his phone. "Call 911, signal's dead out here." Another barked. Storm knocked out half the towers. Jack's heart pounded. He knelt beside the woman, brushing a strand of soaked hair from her face. She was beautiful in an elegant, timeless way, like she didn't belong on a sidewalk in the rain. But she wasn't breathing, and she had no pulse. "I'm trained," he said sharply. "Step back. Who the hell are you?" a man in a tailored coat snapped. Jack didn't answer. He locked his hands together, fingers laced arms straight, and started compressions. 1, 2, 3, 30. He tilted her head, pinched her nose, and breathed into her mouth. Again. Again. "Come on," he muttered, teeth clenched. "Come on, stay with me." Someone tried to pull him back. "You're not a doctor." "Get your hands off me." Jack barked, eyes blazing. "She's dying." The crowd went quiet. The only sound was the steady rhythm of Jack's hands pounding on her chest and the soft pitter-patter of rain against umbrellas. Minutes passed like hours. His arms burned. His jeans were soaked through. His knees scraped on the pavement. Still he pushed. Then a sound, a shallow, raspy cough. Her chest rose. Gasps echoed around them. Jack froze as the woman's lips parted. Her fingers twitched. She blinked, dazed, and whispered something in a breathy accent barely audible over the rain. "S'il vous plaît?" Jack leaned in. "You're okay. You're safe now. Stay with me." Her eyes rolled back. She passed out again, but she was breathing. A woman with a medical kit finally arrived, pushing through the crowd. "Paramedic. Off duty. Let me in." Jack moved aside, hands trembling. He glanced toward the bench. Ellie was still there, watching from under the awning, clutching the donut like a lifeline. Their eyes met. She smiled at him, that sleepy kind of smile that only children can give. The kind that said, "I knew you could do it." Daddy. Jack felt his chest tighten. Not from the CPR. from something else, something ancient and raw and wordless. The paramedic took over. Sirens wailed in the distance. The crowd began to break apart, some murmuring praise, others glancing back at Jack like he was an alien dropped into their world. He stood up, legs unsteady, water streaming from his clothes. The man in the tailored coat who had tried to stop him avoided his eyes. Jack said nothing. He turned, walked back across the square, and picked up Ellie in his arms. "You okay, sweetheart?" She nodded against his shoulder. "Is she gonna be okay too?" "I hope so," he whispered, pressing a kiss to her damp forehead. They walked into the rain, disappearing into the misty streets of the city. Behind them, the woman on the ground was being lifted onto a stretcher, a mask pressed to her face. Her life returned one breath, one miracle. And Jack didn't know her name, didn't want thanks. He didn't even realize yet that this was the moment, this small, unnoticed moment that would change his life forever. Not because he saved someone, but because someone, somewhere, had seen him, and they would not forget. The morning after the rainstorm, Jack Monroe's one-bedroom apartment smelled faintly of wet socks and yesterday's coffee. The old space heater groaned in the corner like it had arthritis, doing its best to warm the cracked linoleum floors and peeling wallpaper. Jack sat at the chipped kitchen table spreading peanut butter on 2 slices of slightly stale bread for Ellie's breakfast. She sat cross-legged in her pajamas, her tiny fingers drawing swirls in the condensation on the window. Her hair was a wild halo and her voice was a quiet murmur. "Did she make it?" she asked, not looking at him. Jack paused the knife, hovering mid-air. "I think so," he said softly. "She was breathing when they took her away." Ellie nodded, lips pressed together. "Then, you were so brave." Jack gave a tired smile. "Nah, I just remembered what to do, that's all." He didn't tell her that he hadn't slept, that all night his mind had replayed the moment her chest moved again. He could still feel the resistance of her ribs beneath his palms, the terrifying weight of a life slipping away in his hands, and he still had no idea who she was. After Ellie was dressed and dropped off at school, her purple backpack bouncing behind her, Jack went to his part-time repair job at Doris Langley's place down the block. Doris was 92, sharp-tongued and sharper-eyed, and lived alone with 3 cats named after U.S. presidents. When he finished rewiring her thermostat and refused the extra $20 she tried to sneak into his tool bag, she squinted at him and muttered, "That girl who collapsed downtown. That was you, wasn't it?" Jack froze. "Ma'am," she pointed her cane at the small box television on the counter. "Saw it on the morning news. They blurred your face, but I know that posture. That's the way you bend when you lift Ellie." Jack scratched the back of his neck. "I didn't do much. You saved a life, boy. You did everything." He left her house with a bag of day-old muffins and a heart strangely heavier than when he arrived. It wasn't guilt, and it wasn't pride. It was something in between. The discomfort of having done something right in a world where right things were too often ignored. Back home, he dropped the tool bag by the door and kicked off his boots. That's when he noticed the sleek black car idling outside his building. It didn't belong in this neighborhood. The paint gleamed like glass. The rims were spotless. And the woman who stepped out of the back seat, tall-striking, dressed in a navy suit that probably cost more than Jack's monthly rent, definitely didn't belong here either. She glanced down at a small notepad, then up at his window with precise certainty. Jack's stomach tightened. A moment later, someone knocked on the door. He opened it cautiously. "Mr. Jack Monroe," the woman asked, her tone firm but polite. "Yes, my name is Mira Talbot. I'm the personal liaison for Camille Durand." Jack blinked. "I don't know that name." She tilted her head. "You saved her life yesterday." His heart skipped. "The woman from the square." "Yes. Miss Durand asked me to find you. She would like to see you personally, to thank you." Jack rubbed a hand down his face. "I appreciate that, but I didn't do it for thanks. She insists. I'm not exactly the tuxedo and caviar type. She's not inviting you to a gala, Mr. Monroe. She simply wants a conversation. Behind him, Ellie's voice floated out from the hallway. "Daddy? Who's that?" Jack looked down at her, still in her school shoes, now gripping the doorframe with both hands. Mira knelt slightly, her tone softening. "Hello, Ellie. I heard your dad is a hero." Ellie beamed. Jack sighed. Where exactly would this conversation take place? Mira didn't blink. "You'd be escorted to a private airfield nearby. Miss Durand is currently resting at her Aspen property. She'd like to fly you both there, just for a day or two." He stared at her. "A private jet?" "Yes." Jack laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so far from his reality that it felt like fiction. "Look, I'm a guy who fixes broken heaters and eats leftover peanut butter sandwiches. I don't fly to Aspen." Mira remained composed. "Miss Durand is not offering a vacation. She's offering her gratitude. She woke up because of you. You changed the course of her life. She would simply like to speak with the man who refused to walk away." Ellie tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, maybe she's the angel you saved." That stopped him cold. He looked from Ellie's hopeful eyes to Mira's calm gaze. Finally, he muttered, "How soon?" "Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. He hesitated, then nodded. "I'll arrange everything Mira said. Clothing, accommodations, food. Just bring yourselves." She handed him a small envelope before leaving. Inside, a flight itinerary, a handwritten note that simply read, "For the man who reminded me what breath feels like. Camille." That night, after Ellie fell asleep, curled up beside him on the couch, Jack stood by the window staring down at the street where the black car had been. He wasn't ready for this, but something deep in his gut whispered, "Go." Not for the luxury, not for the mystery, but because sometimes life knocks once, and if you're lucky enough to answer, it might just change everything. The sun hadn't yet broken the horizon when Jack tightened Ellie's jacket zipper and stepped out into the cold hush of early morning. Fog clung low to the sidewalks like reluctant dreams. The limo waited at the curb, same gleaming black paint, same silent driver in a suit that didn't wrinkle. Ellie clutched her worn pink backpack and looked up at her father, sleepy but excited. "Do you think they'll have snacks on the plane?" Jack smiled, brushing a lock of hair from her cheek. "Probably fancier ones than we're used to." She grinned, and the driver opened the door without a word. They rode in silence through the still-sleeping city. Jack watched the familiar streets blur into highways and then into open space. Everything outside looked the same, but inside him something stirred uneasily. Not fear, not hope, something unfamiliar. A ripple. When they reached the private airstrip, Jack half expected armed guards and flashing lights, but what he saw instead was a sleek silver jet parked beside a glass terminal glowing softly in the dawn light. It was quiet, polished, untouched by chaos. Mira Talbot met them at the entrance, clipboard in hand, composed as ever. "Good morning, Mr. Monroe. Miss Ellie." Ellie offered a sleepy wave. Jack nodded, clutching his duffel bag like armor. Mira led them to the base of the stairs. "You'll be the only passengers. The flight to Aspen will take just under 2 hours." "Only passengers?" Jack asked, eyebrows rising. Mira gave a small professional smile. "Miss Durand prefers privacy." At the top of the steps, a flight attendant with a smooth French accent welcomed them aboard. The interior was nothing like Jack imagined. It wasn't golden or gaudy. It was quiet elegance. Cream leather seats, warm lighting, a single vase of white tulips on a central table. Simple, tasteful. Jack helped Ellie settle into a seat beside the window. She pressed her nose against the glass, immediately marveling at everything. He sat across from her, trying to appear unfazed, but his boots felt too big, his jacket too worn, his presence too loud in this cocoon of wealth. Half an hour into the flight, Jack was staring absently out the window when a voice from behind said softly, "May I?" He turned. The woman from the square stood at the end of the aisle. but this time she was standing under her own strength. Her skin, though still pale, glowed with life. Her eyes, hazel-laced with amber, met his with an intensity that made him forget to stand. Camille Durand was not what he expected. She wore a simple cashmere sweater, gray slacks, and no makeup except for the slight gloss on her lips. There was a faint bandage on her neck just above the collarbone. Vulnerability lingered in her frame, but not weakness. Jack stood belatedly, reaching out his hand awkwardly. Jack Monroe. She ignored the handshake and stepped forward and then did something Jack never anticipated. She hugged him. Soft, tentative, brief, but real. "I wasn't breathing," she said, her voice low. And then, "I was. Because of you." Jack cleared his throat, trying not to crumble under the strange weight of her sincerity. "I just did what anyone would have done." "No," Camille said firmly. "Most people stood and watched. You moved." She sat down across from him. Ellie peeked over the seat, wide-eyed. Camille noticed. "And this must be your daughter." Ellie smiled shyly. "I'm Ellie." Camille leaned forward a little. "Thank you for sharing your dad with me." Ellie blinked. "I didn't share. He ran." Jack laughed. Camille did too. For a moment it felt normal. Then Camille's eyes darkened slightly. "I owe you more than a thank you, Jack. You don't owe me anything." "I disagree." She looked out the window briefly as if gathering something heavy from inside herself. "I was traveling alone on purpose," she said quietly. "I wanted anonymity. Escape. I'd been betrayed. By someone close. I didn't trust anyone. I was, what's the word? Numb." Jack nodded, slowly listening. "I walked into that square without caring much if I walked out," she admitted, then turned back to him. "But you didn't see a headline. Or a fortune. You saw a person. You acted like I mattered." Jack shifted in his seat. "You do matter." Camille tilted her head. "Do you always talk like that? Like people are worth saving even when they're broken?" Jack looked at Ellie, then back at her. "Only because I've been broken too." There was a long pause. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was full. "Would you consider coming to Aspen for a day or two?" Camille asked. "There's a charity retreat happening this weekend. Quiet, private. I'm hosting. I'd like to invite you both. Not as a guest of honor, just as a guest." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Why?" She hesitated. Then, softly, "Because I want to spend time around someone who didn't ask who I was before helping me." "That's rare." He hesitated. Then Ellie chimed in, utterly unaware of the tension. "Do they have hot chocolate in Aspen?" Camille smiled. "The best." Jack exhaled. "All right, one weekend. But we're not wearing tuxedos." "Deal." She stood, nodded graciously, and stepped toward the cockpit. But just before she left, she turned back. "Jack," she said. "Yeah, I don't remember much from those few minutes, but I remember your voice. It pulled me back." Then she disappeared down the aisle, and Jack sat still, the hum of the jet surrounding him like a second heartbeat. He didn't know why the universe had picked him. But in that moment, something shifted. He wasn't just a single dad anymore. He was part of a story much bigger than he'd planned for. And it had only just begun. The snow-dusted peaks of Aspen rose like quiet gods above the horizon as the jet descended. Ellie pressed her face against the window, awestruck by the white canvas below. "It looks like a painting," she whispered. Jack smiled but said nothing. His gaze wasn't on the mountains. It was on the woman seated across the aisle, Camille Durand, who had gone back to reading quietly, one hand absently touching the faint bandage on her neck. There was a kind of grace in her stillness, but something underneath, something haunted. When they landed, another black car waited at the edge of a private runway that looked more like a luxury resort driveway than any airport Jack had seen. The driver opened the doors wordlessly, and within minutes they were weaving through groves of fir trees dusted in snow, the roads winding higher into the Colorado hills. Camille's estate emerged like a mirage wood, glass and stone seamlessly embedded into the mountainside. Warm lights glowed from within, casting long amber lines across the snow. A small group of people in elegant winter coats waited at the entrance, talking quietly beneath outdoor heaters. Jack stepped out of the car boots, crunching on packed snow. Ellie's mittened hand wrapped around his. The air smelled of pine and firewood. Camille turned to them. "You're not expected to mingle unless you want to. This weekend isn't about speeches. It's about connection." Jack gave her a wary smile. "I'm better with tools than with wine glasses." She laughed lightly. "There's a maintenance shed, if it'll help you feel grounded." Inside, the house was even more breathtaking. High ceilings, fireplace the size of a small garage, wide windows that looked out over valleys blanketed in snow. The place exhaled warmth, not just the heat of the rooms, but the kind that came from intention, from a life that had once been full. Camille led them to their rooms, a cozy suite connected to Ellie's with a hallway door. There were fresh linens, chocolate mints on the pillows, and a handwritten note for Ellie that simply said, "Welcome to your adventure." Jack read it twice. He wasn't used to this kind of thoughtfulness, especially not from strangers. Later that evening, a soft knock came at his door. Camille stood there in a thick, cream-colored sweater, her hair loose over her shoulders, looking younger than before. "Come sit by the fire," she asked. Jack glanced toward Ellie, already asleep beneath a pile of stuffed animals, then followed Camille down the quiet hallway. The main living room was nearly empty now, the guests having moved to other corners of the estate. Only the fire crackled. They sat on the floor backs against a couch, the fire warming their faces. "Do you miss her?" Camille asked softly. Jack blinked. "Who? Your wife? Ellie's mom?" He took a breath. It wasn't a question he got asked often, not anymore. Every day he said finally, "She had lupus, diagnosed late. We couldn't afford the treatments right away. By the time we found the right specialist, it was too late." Camille was quiet. Jack stared into the fire. Ellie was only 3. She barely remembers her, but sometimes she'll hum one of the lullabies Lydia used to sing. I don't know if she remembers the song, or just the feeling. Camille's voice was barely audible. "That's what I was missing, I think. The feeling." Jack turned. She was staring into the flame's eyes, distant. "You said someone betrayed you," he said gently. "What happened?" Camille hesitated, then spoke slowly. "I was engaged to one of our foundation's attorneys. I thought I was building something with someone who saw me. Not the company, not the wealth, just me." She shook her head. "Turns out he was building something too, an offshore account, a cover story, and an exit plan with my former assistant." Jack didn't speak. He knew the wound was still raw. "I stepped down from the board for a while, told the press it was stress, told myself it was strategy." Her laugh was bitter. "I didn't trust anyone, didn't even trust myself. I went to Seattle under an alias, trying to feel invisible again." "And then you collapsed," Jack said softly. Camille looked at him. "And then I woke up." To a stranger pounding life back into my chest, and when I opened my eyes, the first face I saw wasn't panicked. It was steady. It was yours. They sat in silence for a long time. Outside the windows, snow began to fall gently. "You're not invisible," Jack said after a while. "Not to people who see past the noise." She turned to him. "And you're not small. You think you are, but you're not." Their eyes locked, nothing romantic yet, but something was taking root. A recognition, a quiet ache to be seen. Understood. Camille exhaled. "Would you stay for the gala tomorrow night?" Jack smirked. "I didn't bring anything fancier than jeans." She smiled. "Then it'll be the best-dressed pair of jeans Aspen's ever seen." They sat by the fire a little longer, letting silence speak for them both. It wasn't awkward. It was healing. And somewhere down the hallway, Ellie stirred in her sleep, the smallest smile curling on her lips. as if she already sensed the truth her father hadn't yet dared to name. Sometimes it takes nearly losing everything to find what matters most. And sometimes the people who walk into your life when you're at your lowest are the ones sent to lift you the highest. Morning in Aspen arrived like a held breath, still pale gold quiet. Snow sparkled on the balconies and steam rose from the outdoor hot tubs nestled between fir trees. It should have been peaceful, but Jack Monroe felt anything but peace. He stood at the breakfast nook in Camille's sprawling kitchen phone in one hand, brow furrowed. Ellie sat nearby, munching on a croissant, swinging her legs and humming softly. The view outside looked like a postcard. The view on Jack's screen looked like a storm. Mystery Man, on Camille Durand's Jet from Mechanic to Mansion. Cinderella, flip. Single dad saves heiress. Wins a weekend in Aspen hero or hustler who is Jack Monroe. The tabloids had found him. Camille walked in moments later, fresh from a morning run, cheeks flushed, hair pulled into a ponytail. She caught the look on his face before he even spoke. "Jack," she asked gently. He turned the screen toward her. Her smile faded. For a second, she said nothing. Then she reached for the phone, scrolled with clinical precision, and exhaled sharply. "I should have anticipated this," she murmured. They were quiet after the accident. But a jet, a single dad, it's the perfect clickbait storm. Jack folded his arms, trying to keep the anger out of his voice. "They found out where Ellie goes to school. There's a photo of her and me from 3 months ago leaving the grocery store." Camille paled. "I'm so sorry, Jack. I never meant for you or Ellie to become targets." "I didn't ask for any of this," Jack said. "I didn't save your life for attention or headlines. I know you didn't. Well, now I'm the mystery man. A handyman with a kid suddenly flown into the lap of luxury like some charity case. That's not how I see you, but it's how they see me, and how they'll see her." He nodded toward Ellie, who looked up with a mouthful of pastry, blissfully unaware. Camille crossed the room and spoke lower, calmer. "We can fix this. I'll call my PR team. We'll issue a clarification. Remove names, blur faces, whatever you want." Jack's jaw clenched. "I want my daughter to be left alone. That's what I want. You have my word. I'll make sure of it." He hesitated. "Maybe we should go, before it gets worse." But Camille stepped closer, her voice urgent now. "Please, don't let them scare you away from something good." He blinked. "What is this, Camille?" Her eyes softened. "Something rare." Before he could respond, Mira appeared at the entryway with a tablet in hand and a grave expression. "Camille," she said carefully, the stories spreading faster than expected. "3 national outlets have picked it up. Your name is trending. So is Jack's. And Ellie's first name was mentioned in one segment." Jack's hands curled into fists. "I'm pulling the story down," Camille said instantly. "I'll throw the lawyers at them." Mira hesitated. "There's another option. A press statement. Your voice. Get ahead of the narrative. Frame it the right way." Jack shook his head. "I didn't come here for interviews." Camille turned to him, quiet but firm. "I can handle this, but you need to trust me." He studied her. She wasn't the woman from the sidewalk anymore. She was standing strong, spine, straight eyes, clear not just as someone saved, but as someone trying to protect. And for the first time since yesterday, Jack didn't feel powerless. "I trust you," he said finally. Camille nodded once, then turned to Mira. "Schedule a controlled interview. No tabloids. Someone reputable." Mira gave a brisk nod and left the room. Ellie wandered over and tugged at Jack's shirt. "Are you mad, Daddy?" He knelt beside her. "No, sweetheart. I'm just tired of people talking like they know us." She tilted her head. "But they don't know that you sang me lullabies every night when Mommy went to heaven, or that you fixed our heater with a spoon." Jack blinked, caught between a smile and a tear. "You're right," he said. "They don't. Then maybe we tell them the good stuff." He looked up at Camille. She'd heard it too, and maybe that was the turning point. That evening, a small gathering was held in Camille's main lodge, an informal fireside event meant for her inner circle of donors, volunteers, and board members of the Duran Foundation. No cameras, just people. Jack stayed on the sidelines holding a mug of coffee, Ellie leaning sleepily against his leg. He felt like a barn cat in a room full of show dogs. Then a familiar voice rose above the low murmurs. "And I'd like to introduce someone most of you don't know, though the press thinks they do." Camille stood beside the fire, radiant in a simple black sweater dress, no notes in hand, no podium. "This is Jack Monroe. He's a single father. He works hard. He gives more than he has. And last week he saved my life, not because he recognized my name, but because he saw a human being in need. And he acted." The room grew still. Camille continued, her voice steady. "The headlines got one thing right. He is a hero. But not because of CPR. Because of how he lives. With humility. With heart. And with a child who thinks the world of him." Ellie beamed. Jack wanted to sink into the floor. But then came the applause, genuine, not polite. Camille turned toward him, her voice quieter now. "I don't care how they frame the story. This is the version I believe in, and it's the only one that matters." Jack didn't know what to say, but in his chest, where the weight of years had settled like stone, something cracked, and something hopeful started to breathe. The snow kept falling overnight, silent and endless, blanketing the estate in a hush that felt sacred. But inside Jack Monroe's chest a storm brewed quietly tight, uncertain and unresolved. He stood in front of the guest room mirror, tugging awkwardly at the sleeves of the navy sport coat Camille's assistant had left for him. The tag still clung to the inner seam. The shirt underneath fit fine, but the reflection looking back at him didn't feel like him. It felt like a borrowed costume for a role he hadn't auditioned for. Ellie peeked into the room, her braid slightly crooked, wearing a simple white dress with a velvet ribbon tied at the waist. "Daddy, she said you look like the principal from school." "But younger." Jack chuckled, loosening the collar. "Is that a compliment?" She nodded solemnly. "You look kind of important." "Kind of." That was the part that stuck. By the time the gala began, the house had transformed. Dozens of guests filled the grand hall, philanthropists, doctors, educators, artists, all mingling with glasses of wine and murmured applause. String music played softly near the stone hearth. Ellie was already curled on a settee with a book under the care of Mira, who doted on her like a favorite aunt. Jack stuck to the edges of the room, nursing a ginger ale. The conversations around him floated like foreign currency grants, innovation, mergers, legacies. Words he rarely used. Lives he didn't recognize. Camille arrived late, descending the staircase in a floor-length gown the color of storm clouds, satin, and silent. She moved with the grace of someone born to this world, but when her eyes found Jack's, something softened. She crossed the room toward him, ignoring the glances that followed. "You clean up well," she said. Jack smirked. "I had help." They stood together for a moment, watching the event swirl around them like a snow globe someone had just shaken. And then came the voice. "Well, well, the man of the hour." Jack turned to see a tall, sharp-featured man in a tuxedo approach, grin. Too wide, handshake, too eager. "Marcus Ashford," he said. "PR consultant, also occasional cynic." Jack took his hand reluctantly. "Jack Monroe." Marcus leaned closer. "Between us, you've got one hell of a redemption arc. Blue-collar dad meets heiress. It's practically Oscar bait." Jack froze. "Excuse me." Marcus winked. "Oh, don't worry. They'll eat it up. I mean, I can already hear the podcast titles, The Man Who Fixed the Furnace and Her Heart." Camille's eyes narrowed. "That's enough, Marcus." But the man wasn't done. "Tell me, did the producers already call? Or are we still waiting for the bidding war?" Jack's voice came low and cold. "You don't know me." Marcus raised his hands mockingly. "Whoa, touchy." Jack stepped back. "I need air." He left the room without another word, pushing past waitstaff and murmurs. He found the terrace door and stepped outside where the mountain air hit him like a wave, sharp, clean, real. The snow had eased into flurries. Below, Aspen twinkled like a jewel against the dark hills. Jack leaned on the railing, jaw tight. The words echoed redemption arc, podcast, Oscar bait. He hadn't come here for any of that. Jack Camille's voice came behind him. He didn't turn around. "I'm sorry about him," she said softly. "Marcus works with one of the corporate donors. He has a habit of weaponizing charm." Jack stayed quiet. She stepped beside him. "You're not a character, Jack. And this isn't a fairy tale." "I know that." Jack shook his head. "I don't belong here." "Yes, you do." "No," he said, turning now. "You say that, but look at what happens the second someone like me walks into your world. I become a headline, a punchline. I get dissected, judged. You saved my life. That's not enough to make me fit in." "You don't have to fit in," she said, voice rising. "You just have to be here. With me. With Ellie." Jack's eyes darkened. "You think this is about Ellie?" Camille took a breath. "Isn't it? You've kept the world at arm's length because of her. Because you think if anything good touches your life, it'll disappear. Like her mother did." That hit hard. Jack stared at her. Camille's voice broke. "You saved me, Jack. But you won't let anyone save you." He looked away, chest tight. "I can't afford another loss. I have a daughter who already lost her mother. She doesn't need a fairy tale. She needs consistency, reality. And reality is," Camille said gently, stepping closer, "that people like me can bleed, can fall, can be pulled back into life by a man who smells like engine grease and sings lullabies off-key. I don't want a savior. I want someone who chooses to stay." He looked at her now, really looked, the rawness in her voice, the earnest plea in her posture. Jack swallowed. "I don't know how to be part of your world. Then let's build one that belongs to both of us." Silence stretched, and in that silence a bridge began to form. Jack closed his eyes. The wind tugged gently at his coat, and then he nodded just once. Camille exhaled almost in relief. Inside, the music continued. But outside, beneath the stars and snow, something had shifted. They weren't strangers anymore. They were survivors. And perhaps, if the world could be cruel enough to bring them both to the edge, it could also be kind enough to give them somewhere to land. The next morning, the house was quiet in that gentle way all big places are when the crowd has thinned and only the heartbeat remains. Most of the guests had already left. The gala was over. The snow was melting under a weak Colorado sun, and Jack Monroe stood in the library holding a cup of coffee he hadn't yet touched. The fire crackled beside him. His eyes traced the spines of books he hadn't read and probably never would. Titles about art philosophy, global health. None of them had anything to do with fixing things, and that's what he knew, how to fix what was broken. What he didn't know was how to fix this quiet ache inside him. The door creaked open. Ellie stepped in, her face unusually serious, hugging a stuffed rabbit against her chest. Jack immediately straightened. "Hey, Peanut, you okay?" She hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." She crossed the room slowly and climbed into the leather chair beside his. "Are we poor?" The question landed like a rock in his chest. He blinked. "What I heard the fancy man at the party, the one with the bow tie, he said we didn't belong here, that we were charity." Jack set his coffee down. "Ellie, is that true?" Her voice didn't waver, but her hands gripped the rabbit a little tighter. He crouched beside her, steady and calm, the way he always did when she had big feelings she didn't know where to put. "Listen to me," he said. "We don't have a lot of money. That part's true. But we have a lot of things that matter more, like kindness, like courage, like love." Her lip trembled. "Then why do people act like we're less than them?" Jack exhaled, because they've forgotten what really matters. Ellie looked at him with eyes that had always been a little older than her years. Mom never cared about money, did she? Jack smiled faintly. No. Your mom loved gardenias, rainy days, and old love songs. She cared about the way people made her feel. Ellie leaned her head on his shoulder. I remember her a little, but I remember you more. He closed his eyes. You work so hard, she said softly. You don't get new things. You don't sleep much. But you always sing to me. You always say yes when I ask for an extra bedtime story. You always stay. Jack couldn't speak. And I don't want you to think I need someone like Camille to fix our lives, Ellie continued. You already fix things, Daddy. You fix hearts. Jack's throat tightened, a lump forming he couldn't swallow down. She's nice, Ellie added quickly. I like her. She listens, and she smells like vanilla and flowers. Jack chuckled through the ache. But even if she goes away one day, Ellie said, I just want you to be happy again. You've been lonely, even when you smile. That shattered him. Not in a way that broke him, but in the way a frozen lake breaks when spring finally comes. He pulled her into a hug and held her tightly, one hand cupping the back of her head. I'm not lonely with you, he whispered. I know, she said. But you don't always let people help. You should. Later that afternoon, Jack found Camille on the back patio, bundled in a thick shawl, sipping tea and gazing out at the mountains. Her eyes tracked him as he approached, quiet and thoughtful. You look like you've been somewhere, she said. I was, he replied, inside my daughter's head. Camille smiled gently. Wise place to be. She said, I fix hearts. She's not wrong. Jack sat beside her. You know what scares me? That you'll fall for me, and I'll break you. He blinked. Well, that wasn't exactly what I was going to say. She grinned. But it's on your mind. He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. I'm not good at changing tracks. I've been on survival mode for so long I forgot what it felt like to just be, to let someone in. Camille looked down at her hands, turning her teacup slowly. I used to be surrounded by people. Meetings, applause, appearances, but no one really saw me. Not the real me. I didn't even know who that was anymore. She looked up at him. Then I collapsed in a square. Died, technically. And came back. To a man who didn't know my name but called me back anyway. Jack shook his head. I didn't save you. You came back because you wanted to live. No, Jack. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I came back because for the first time someone asked me to stay. Silence wrapped around them like a warm blanket. I'm afraid, Jack admitted. So am I, Camille replied. But fear means there's something to lose, and I think we both deserve something to hold on to. They didn't kiss, not yet, but their hands found each other's fingers, brushing, then clasping. And in that quiet moment beneath the snowy peaks and between two wounded souls, something powerful took root. Not rescue, not romance, but the slow, brave beginning of healing. That night, as Ellie drifted to sleep with the stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm and Jack humming an old lullaby, she didn't know the words to Camille, watched from the hallway, quiet, unseen. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't thinking about her inheritance or legacy or the headlines. She was thinking about that little girl, and the man who never once walked away, and the terrifying, beautiful thought that maybe, just maybe, she had finally come home. The Durand Foundation's Winter Gala had always been a polished affair, crystal chandeliers, live string quartets, speeches curated to perfection. But this year, something felt different. Not because the room was less grand, it wasn't. Not because the donors were fewer, they weren't. It was different because Camille Durand had changed. She stood backstage in a quiet hallway just off the ballroom wearing a deep emerald dress that shimmered like pine needles in moonlight. Her fingers fidgeted slightly with the edge of a note card she hadn't intended to use. Across from her, Jack waited in his modest charcoal jacket freshly pressed by Mira's team. They weren't there for the optics anymore. They were there because something bigger was blooming between them within them, and now maybe for the world to see. Camille turned to Jack. "Are you sure you're up for this?" He raised an eyebrow. "You mean the speech? Or walking into a room where half the people think I'm your midlife crisis?" She almost laughed, but the truth in his tone stung. "That's not what they think." He glanced at the crowd visible through the curtains. "Some of them do." "Then let them," she said firmly. "Because I know who you are." Jack paused. "I'm not good at public things." She stepped closer, her voice low and calm. "Just speak like you do to Ellie. Speak like no one's watching but her." That stilled him. Mira peeked through the curtains and nodded. "It's time." Camille took a breath, then walked out first. The crowd hushed as she reached the stage. The room, bathed in gold and amber lighting, held nearly 200 people, some donors, some press, some friends. But all eyes were on her. "Good evening," she began. "Tonight you were expecting the usual recap of our foundation's milestones, grants-funded programs, launched statistics delivered with flair." She smiled lightly. "But instead, I'd like to introduce someone who represents the why behind all those numbers." She turned toward the curtain. Jack stepped out. He didn't stride or pose. He simply walked like a man who'd never expected to be on a stage, modest, calm, and real. He wore no tie. He carried no notes, just his hands in his pockets and his heart in his eyes. He looked out at the crowd, then down at Camille. She nodded once. Jack adjusted the mic, cleared his throat. "I'm not here because I belong in a room like this," he said honestly. "I'm here because one day in a city square I saw someone collapse, and I couldn't walk away." A quiet ripple moved through the audience. "I'm a single dad," he continued. "A guy who fixes broken things, mostly heaters and refrigerators, sometimes toys that have been stepped on too many times. I've made a lot of mistakes. I've missed payments. I've eaten cold soup for dinner more times than I care to count." He glanced toward where Ellie sat beside Mira, dressed in a pale blue dress, legs swinging. She smiled at him, and he smiled back. "But I've never missed a bedtime story, and I've never let my daughter go to sleep wondering if she mattered." The room was still. When Camille fell, there wasn't time to think about who she was. She wasn't a billionaire or a headline. She was just a woman who'd stopped breathing. And I did what I knew to do, not because I'm a hero, but because I couldn't imagine her daughter, if she had one, losing her like mine lost her mom. Gasps echoed. A few wiped their eyes. "I'm not good with charity galas or the right fork for salad, but I know how to hold a hand that's slipping, and I know what it means to keep showing up even when no one's clapping." He stepped back slightly, his voice quieter now. "If this foundation is about impact, then let it be about moments like that. Ordinary people. Extraordinary choices. Not just big checks, but hearts that won't walk away." He nodded, almost to himself. Then, "Thank you." The applause didn't burst like thunder. It rose like a wave, slow, growing undeniable. People stood, one by one, until the whole room was on its feet. Camille looked up at Jack, her eyes bright, her hand finding his as they stepped down together. After the speeches, the ballroom shifted into celebration. Wine glasses clinked, laughter rose, conversations bloomed with sincerity for the first time that evening. Jack found Ellie curled up in a corner of the room reading. He knelt beside her. "Hey, Peanut, how was I?" She closed the book and leaned on his shoulder. "You made people cry. That's how you know it was good." He chuckled. "That wasn't the goal." She looked up, but maybe it needed to happen. A few feet away, Camille stood surrounded by donors, but her gaze never left Jack. Later that night, when the lights dimmed and the crowd thinned, Jack and Camille stood by the massive window overlooking the moonlit forest. The music had faded to a gentle piano echo. "That was brave," she whispered. He shrugged. "I just told the truth." Camille turned to him. "Then maybe more people should start doing that." They didn't need more words. Their fingers laced naturally. And for the first time in a long time, Jack didn't feel like he was borrowing someone else's world. He felt like he was building something new, brick by brick, moment by moment. Not because of who Camille was, but because of who they could be together. And from the other side of the room, Ellie watched them with a sleepy smile, then turned back to her book. Some stories she was learning were better lived than read, and this one was just beginning. 2 days after the gala, Aspen's skies had cleared to a crisp blue, and the Durand estate felt more like a retreat center than a billionaire's home. Most guests had left, but the air still hummed with what had been stirred conversations, emotions, possibilities. And something new, unspoken, between Jack and Camille. They were in the greenhouse behind the main lodge, sunlight streaming through the glass roof, warming the scent of fresh herbs and blooming winter roses. Jack knelt in front of a wooden planter box, helping Ellie repot a basil plant, while Camille watched from across the bench, twirling a ceramic mug in her hand. "You ever think about doing this, full-time?" Camille asked. Jack looked up. "You mean gardening?" She smiled. "No, I mean this teaching, fixing, leading." Jack leaned back on his heels. "I do fix things for a living, you know. I don't mean appliances," she said. "I mean people." He gave her a skeptical look. "I'm not a therapist." Camille set her mug down. "What if I told you I have a program in mind, something long-term, real, and I want you to help build it?" Jack raised an eyebrow. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." She stood now, speaking with the clarity of someone who'd thought this through for days. "We've been talking for years about expanding our outreach to underserved communities, especially around emergency preparedness and health education. But it always felt theoretical, safe, detached. Until now." Jack stood slowly. "You're talking about CPR programs." "And more," she said. "Basic life-saving skills. First aid training, hands-on repair clinics, fatherhood workshops, everything you do naturally, instinctively passing it on." Jack stared at her. "You want me to run it? I want you to help build it," she said. "With us. With me. From the ground up." Ellie, still kneeling by the planter box, looked up. "Would we get to help kids like the ones at the shelter?" Jack paused. "Yeah, sweetie. That's the idea." Camille stepped closer. "I can fund the infrastructure, but I don't want this to be another Durand headline. I want it to feel like your legacy, too." Jack swallowed hard. "That's a lot. It's what you've already been doing. Quietly. You just didn't have a name for it." He looked down at his hands, calloused, worn, steady, then at Ellie, now gently patting soil around the new roots. And finally at Camille, eyes steady, offering not a handout, but a hand in. "What would it look like?" he asked. She lit up. "A pilot program in Seattle. You'd choose the location. We bring in volunteers, training teams, build a mobile unit eventually. We call it Every Breath Counts." Jack chuckled. "That sounds like something my daughter would come up with." Ellie clapped. "I love it." He turned back to Camille, the smile softening. "You've thought of everything." She shook her head. "Not everything, just the parts that matter." Silence settled between them, but it was warm, not awkward. Jack nodded slowly. "Let's do it." Camille blinked. "Really?" He took a breath. "It's terrifying. But maybe that's how I know it's right." That evening, they returned to the main lodge where Mira had set up a small celebratory dinner, just the three of them and a few staff who had become like family over the past week. Nothing fancy roast chicken cornbread, homemade lemonade. After dessert, Ellie got up and presented Camille with a drawing done in marker on hotel stationery. It showed a cartoon version of Jack fixing a big red heart with a wrench, Camille standing beside him with a clipboard, and Ellie handing out chocolate chip cookies to smiling kids. At the top, in big crayon letters, it read, "The Fix-It Team." Camille laughed through a tear. "I'm framing this." "You better," Ellie said proudly. "It's the first draft of our logo." They all laughed, and for a moment there was nothing complicated between them, just joy and warmth and the quiet miracle of belonging. After Ellie went to bed, Jack and Camille stepped outside, bundled in coats, leaning on the railing that overlooked the glowing slope of Aspen below. "She believes in this more than I do." Jack said, his breath visible in the cold air. "She believes in you," Camille replied. "And so do I." Jack was quiet for a long moment. "I didn't think this was possible." "What this?" he said. "A life that doesn't feel like holding my breath all the time." She looked at him gently. "That's what this is about, isn't it? Every breath counts. It's not just about CPR." Jack nodded. "It's about choosing to live, not just survive." Camille's hand found his, and this time it didn't feel uncertain. It felt earned. Later that night, Jack watched Ellie sleeping peacefully, her arms around her stuffed rabbit. He closed the door softly and turned to find Camille waiting in the hallway. "I'm scared," he said honestly. "So am I," she admitted. "But I want to try." "Then let's try." He stepped toward her, heart pounding, and kissed her gently, reverently. Not a fairy tale kiss. A real one, full of questions and hope and all the healing they still had left to do. When they finally pulled apart, Camille whispered, "You just made your first bold move as co-founder." He smiled. "I'll take it." And somewhere in the quiet corners of that Colorado night, the past softened and the future began to hum. Because every breath really did count, and some were meant to be taken together. 3 weeks later, Seattle was its usual gray self, rain glistening on sidewalks, traffic humming like a tired lullaby. But inside the modest community center in the Rainier Valley neighborhood, something new was taking root. Jack stood in the middle of a gym-turned-training space, watching as a dozen kids ages 11 to 16 practiced chest compressions on CPR mannequins. Ellie sat with a girl her age, teaching her how to count out loud. The girl had lost her brother in a bike accident the year before. She wanted to be the kind of person who could save someone. Jack's heart swelled. He hadn't felt this kind of peace in years. "First class is a success," came Camille's voice from behind him. Jack turned and grinned. She looked out of place in her tailored coat and heels, but she wore it all like armor, and these days he knew what was beneath it. The woman who'd fought back from silence, who'd traded luxury for meaning. "It's more than a success," he said. "It's the first time I've seen some of these kids smile since they walked through the door." Camille looked around. "This place matters." Jack nodded. "We've only scratched the surface. There's still a whole city out there. You know, she said we could take this model nationwide. Start with 5 cities, build a volunteer network." He chuckled. "You never think small, do you?" "Not when I see something real." Just then, Ellie ran up with a flyer in hand. "Daddy, Miss Camille. Look, they want me to help at the booth next Saturday." Jack looked down. The flyer read, "Community Preparedness Fair. Every Breath Counts Pavilion. Kid Ambassadors. Welcome." Camille knelt beside her. "That's a pretty big job." Ellie's eyes sparkled. "I want to do it. I want people to know what we're building." Camille smiled. "Then you're already doing it." Jack placed a hand on Ellie's shoulder. "Go grab your things, Peanut. We're heading home soon." After she dashed off, Camille's expression softened. "She's blooming, Jack. You both are." He looked down, voice quiet. "There was a time I thought this life, this kind of joy, wasn't meant for me." Camille's eyes searched his. "Do you still believe that no?" He met her gaze. "Because you've made room for me in a world I never imagined myself entering." "You walked into it," she said. "I just left the door open." They were quiet a moment. Then Jack's phone buzzed. A message from his landlord, cold but expected new owner. "Lease not renewed. You have 30 days." He sighed and tucked the phone away. Camille noticed the change in his face. "What's wrong?" Jack hesitated. "Just life. Our apartment's being sold. I'll figure it out." Camille was quiet. "Come live here." Jack blinked. "What?" She stepped closer. "Not in Aspen." Here, I've leased a place 3 blocks from the center. Plenty of room. Quiet street, good schools. He looked at her stunned. You're not a project, Jack. And this isn't charity, she said. It's life, shared, chosen. I can't just move into your world. Then, don't, she said. Move into ours. Jack looked away for a moment, then back to her. I'm scared I'll lose it. Camille reached for his hand. Then hold it tight. Let's build something no one can take. Jack stared at her, and in her eyes he didn't see pity or rescue. He saw home. That weekend they packed what little they had. Jack's old truck groaned under the weight of boxes, but Ellie made it a game naming each box like a pet. The last one, labeled Memories, rode up front with her. Their new place wasn't grand, but it was warm, bright, the kind of space that echoed with possibility. Camille was waiting when they pulled in, holding a set of keys and a bag of takeout from the diner around the corner. That night they sat on the floor, no furniture yet, eating burgers and watching Ellie build a fort out of boxes. Camille turned to Jack. You know, I never imagined my life looking like this. Neither did I. But now I can't imagine it any other way. Jack leaned over and kissed her slow, certain, full of quiet fire. Ellie peeked from behind her box fort. You, she giggled. You guys are weird. Camille laughed. We're just happy. Same thing Ellie said. Later, as the house quieted and Ellie drifted to sleep in her new room, Jack stood on the porch with Camille watching the rain mist across the street lamps. I was just a guy, he said, trying to get home with a donut and a sleepy kid. And then the world shifted. Camille wrapped her arms around his waist. You weren't just anything. You were exactly who I needed. Jack looked at her. You ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been there that day? She shook her head. No, because I don't believe in accidents anymore. Jack pulled her close. Me neither. In the quiet that followed, they stood in the doorway of a life neither of them had planned, but both had chosen. Not because it was easy, but because it was right. And far across the city, somewhere in another home, another single parent sat alone, maybe wondering if kindness mattered. If anyone noticed, they would. Because somewhere a girl named Ellie had already signed up to tell them every breath counts, especially the ones we take for others. And the man who once thought his life was too small now knew the truth. Some hearts don't need fixing. They just need a place to keep beating. 6 months later, the Seattle air was warm with the promise of spring. Children laughed in the distance, chasing bubbles and paper kites near the edge of Jefferson Park. The cherry trees were beginning to bloom, quiet pink explosions lining the sidewalks outside the newly repurposed community center that now bore a brass plaque above the door. Every Breath Counts Initiative. In honor of those who stayed when it mattered most. Inside, the gymnasium pulsed with life. There were CPR mannequins lined up in rows, first aid kits stacked neatly along the wall, and a circle of volunteers in matching Navy shirts preparing for the afternoon's big event, the launch of their first citywide youth responder program. At the center of it all stood Jack Monroe, clipboard in hand, sleeves rolled up, smiling like a man who had finally caught up with the life that once outran him. He moved with ease now, not because life was simple, but because it was shared. Because every day he woke up to a new kind of peace, the kind built not from perfection, but from purpose. Dad Ellie's voice rang out from across the room, high and joyful. She ran toward him in her own mini-sized Every Breath Counts t-shirt, proudly holding a ribbon-wrapped certificate. He knelt to meet her. You finished the full responder level already? Yup, she beamed. I passed everything, even the Heimlich test. Jack's eyes softened. You're officially more qualified than I was when I saved Camille. Don't worry, she whispered. I'll back you up next time. He pulled her into a hug, heart full. In the hallway, Camille stood beside a small team of foundation partners finalizing notes for the press. But her eyes kept drifting back toward Jack and Ellie like they were a fire she never wanted to stray far from. She no longer wore the armor of image. Her elegance remained, but now it glowed with something quieter, something earned. Mira leaned in beside her. "This is the best thing we've ever built." Camille nodded, "and the only thing that's ever felt real all the way through." Mira smiled. "You should tell them." "I plan to," Camille replied, already stepping toward the gym. That afternoon, as folding chairs filled with local families and city leaders, Camille took the stage under a modest string of lights. Jack stood off to the side with Ellie arms loosely crossed, waiting to see what she'd say. 6 months ago, Camille began. I was lying on a sidewalk in Seattle. I had no pulse. I had no breath. I had no direction. The room grew still. And then someone who wasn't paid to care, who didn't know my name, gave me all 3 back. She glanced at Jack. He blinked slowly, swallowing emotion. His name is Jack Monroe. He's a father, a mechanic, a man who showed me that love isn't always loud, it's steady, and sometimes it shows up in the form of calloused hands and quiet courage. A tear slipped down someone's cheek in the second row. Camille continued, voice strong. This program, Every Breath Counts, isn't about celebrity or philanthropy. It's about you. It's about neighbors saving neighbors, fathers teaching daughters, communities learning that their power comes from their people. She looked down, then up again with a soft smile, because sometimes one act of kindness doesn't just save a life, it creates one. The applause was instant, standing, roaring, heartfelt. Jack didn't move right away, but Ellie tugged his hand. "Go." He stepped up beside Camille. She turned to him and without a word passed the mic into his hand. Jack cleared his throat. "I never thought I'd stand in a room like this. Honestly, 6 months ago, I was just trying to keep the lights on and get my kid to school on time." Laughter rippled gently through the crowd. But something happens when you realize your story matters, not just the survival parts, but the why you keep going. This center, these people, they gave me back the part of myself I'd forgotten I had. He looked toward Ellie. She reminded me. Every night when I sang the lullaby her mom used to hum, when she told me I was already enough. Jack paused, then turned toward Camille. And Camille, she didn't just come back to life on that sidewalk. She came into life. She chose not just to survive, but to build. He looked out at the audience. And now, it's our turn. The crowd rose again, this time, slower, deliberate. A standing ovation that wasn't about fanfare. It was about truth. That evening, after the guests had gone and the sun began to dip behind the city skyline, Jack and Camille stood on the center's rooftop garden where Ellie danced among potted herbs and wildflowers. The city glowed below. "I still can't believe this is real," Jack murmured. Camille leaned into him. "Believe it. You made it real." He looked at her, wonder still in his voice. "Do you think we'll keep going, that we can make this last?" She didn't hesitate. "We already have." He turned, took her hands in his. "Camille Durand, you were the breath I didn't know I needed." She smiled. "Jack Monroe, you were the silence I didn't know needed breaking." And then beneath the sky where their stories first collided, they kissed, quiet, deep, whole. A promise made not of words, but of presence. A few feet away, Ellie twirled her laughter, floating up like music. And in that moment, life didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to be lived with love, with grace, and with the knowledge that even one breath, one act, one person can change everything. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from, and what part of this story touched you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every one of them. If this story moved you, inspired you, or simply made you feel something real, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support means the world and helps us continue bringing powerful human-centered stories to life. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, take care, stay kind, and remember, every breath counts.